The night my cousin called me a free hotel with a maid service. Right in front of my aunt, my uncle, and half the extended family at my grandmother's 80th birthday dinner. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just set down my fork very slowly, looked him in the eye, and said, quietly enough that only he could hear, "Enjoy tonight. It's the last thing I'm paying for." He laughed. He actually laughed like I'd made a joke. By the time dessert was cleared, I had already sent 3 emails. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why that moment broke something open in me. Something I hadn't even known was sealed shut. You have to understand how I got there. How a 31-year-old woman with a good job, a condo she owned, and what she genuinely believed was a generous heart ended up sitting at a birthday dinner, feeling like a vending machine that had somehow learned to smile. My name is Elise. I'm a project coordinator for a mid-sized engineering firm in Ottawa. I make decent money, not extravagant, but enough to live comfortably, save for retirement, take a trip once a year if I plan ahead. I grew up in a large French-Canadian family spread across eastern Ontario and Quebec. The kind of family where Sunday dinners ran 3 hours, and someone always had a crisis, and nobody ever talked about money directly. They just expect certain people to handle it. I was always one of those people. I don't know exactly when it started. That's the thing about being the reliable one. Nobody schedules a meeting to assign you the role. It just accumulates. You cover the tab once because your cousin forgot his wallet. Then you spot your aunt the damage deposit when she moves apartments because she's between paychecks. Then you lend your uncle $800 because his car registration lapsed. And he can't drive to work without renewing it, and he'll pay you back. On Friday, he swears. Friday becomes next week becomes honestly, Elise, I thought we were family. Why are you keeping score? My cousin? I'll call him my cousin, because that's what he is. Though cousin feels too warm a word for what he became, is 34 years old. His name is Sebastian. He's a year older than me, which he used to bring up constantly when we were teenagers, as though those 12 extra months granted him some permanent authority. He works occasionally. Construction flag. The summers, EI in the winters, odd jobs in between. He's charming in the way people are charming when they've figured out that charm is a tool. He smiles wide, he makes everyone laugh, he remembers birthdays. Not because he cares, I eventually understood, but because remembered birthdays kept people warm toward him. And warm people were easier to ask things of. He moved to Ottawa 3 years ago. Before that, he'd been in Gatineau, then Montreal, then Gatineau again. Each move had a story. The landlord was impossible. The roommate was unstable. The job fell through, but there was a better one lined up. Just needed to bridge the gap. He called me from a gas station parking lot at 11 at night. His voice doing that specific thing it did when he needed something, lower, more serious, like he was forcing himself to admit weakness. And he said he had nowhere to go, just for a few weeks while he sorted things out. I had a spare room. I said yes. That was 38 months ago. In 38 months, Sebastian paid me rent exactly 4 times. I have the e-transfers to prove it. 4 payments of $600 each, the last one 14 months ago. He was supposed to pay $800 a month. In Ottawa, $800 doesn't get you a closet anymore, but I wasn't trying to profit off family. I just wanted something nominal, something that maintained the fiction that this was a mutual arrangement between adults. He negotiated me down to $600. He said he was struggling. I said fine. Fine. That word did a lot of work in my life for a very long time. I covered groceries most weeks. I told myself he was buying his own food, but somehow the fridge was always full of things I'd bought and empty of things he had. I paid the internet, the streaming services, the utilities. When his phone got cut off, I added him to my plan. When his car needed new brake pads, I drove him to Canadian Tire and put it on my visa because he said he'd transfer me within the week. When he got a speeding ticket on the 417 and couldn't pay it before the deadline, I covered it so the fine wouldn't double. Each thing, alone, was manageable. That's what I told myself. Each thing was small enough to absorb. And I want to be honest here because I've spent a lot of time being honest with myself since all of this happened. I let it go on, partly because confrontation felt harder than compliance, and partly because somewhere underneath all of it, I believed that being needed meant being loved. I had conflated the two so completely that I didn't even notice until much later. My aunt knew. She's Sebastian's mother, and she knew exactly what her son was doing. And not only did she not discourage it, she participated. Subtle things at first. Mentioning in family group chats that Sebastian was having a hard time, right after I'd been tagged in a photo from a work event that looked nice. Asking me, in that careful tone she had, whether I was still helping Sebastian get on his feet. Using the word helping as though what was happening was a short-term act of generosity rather than an ongoing extraction. Then less subtle things. Last December, she called me directly and asked if I could cover Sebastian's portion of the family Christmas gift. We pool money every year to buy my grandmother something meaningful, because he was tight that month. I said yes. In February, she texted to ask if I could just quickly add him to my Costco membership because he was trying to save money on groceries. I said yes to that too. I kept saying yes. I don't know why I kept saying yes. I think I kept saying yes because every no felt like a moral failure, like I was proving I was selfish, proving I was the cold one, the one who cared more about money than family. My aunt had a particular gift for making me feel that way without ever saying it outright. She'd just get quiet when I hesitated. That specific silence that meant, I expected better from you. The breaking point, when it came, didn't announce itself dramatically. It came on a Tuesday morning in March, when I was sitting at my desk at work, running numbers on a project budget, and my phone lit up with a notification from my banking app. I had a pre-authorized payment set up. I had set it up myself because Sebastian kept forgetting to e-transfer me, and it was easier to just automate it. And I'd accidentally set it in the wrong direction. Instead of him transferring to me, I'd linked it so I was transferring to him. I'd been depositing $200 a month into his account for 7 months without realizing it. I sat with that for a long time. I ran the actual numbers that night, after work, with a glass of wine and a spreadsheet I'd never let myself make before. Everything I could document: the rent he hadn't paid, the groceries, the phone plan, the car repairs, the tickets, the Christmas gift, the incidental hundreds that had bled out over 3 years. The total came to just over $19,000. That's not counting the things I couldn't put a number on. The hours I'd spent managing his problems, the mental load of always knowing when his next crisis was coming. The fact that I'd turned down a chance to sublet my spare room to a friend's colleague who would have paid me $1,200 a month and used the money to pay off a chunk of my mortgage instead. $19,000. In Canada, that's more than my RRSP contribution room for the year. That's a used car. That's a substantial down payment addition on the next property I'd been hoping to eventually buy. That was money I had earned hour by hour at a job I worked hard at, and I had watched it dissolve into a life I had never agreed to fund. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. I didn't confront Sebastian, didn't call my aunt, didn't post anything in the family group chat. I just closed the spreadsheet, finished my wine, and started making a plan. The plan took 2 months. I'm methodical by nature. It's part of what makes me good at my job. And I wanted to do this correctly. I moved Sebastian out of my cell phone plan first, quietly, and added a second number I'd use just for communications with him going forward so I could document things separately. I called my bank and canceled the accidental, pre-authorized transfer and set up an alert for any new ones. I began photographing receipts for anything in my home I'd purchased that he used. I pulled together a written summary of the financial history, as complete as I could make it, and had my friend, who's a paralegal. She's not a lawyer, but she knows how to make a document look serious. Review it for clarity. I also started looking for a new place for him to go. Not because I was going to kick him out immediately, but because I wanted to have options ready. I found a rooming house near Baseline Station that had a vacancy, $650 a month shared kitchen, not glamorous but habitable, and I kept the listing saved on my phone. My grandmother's 80th birthday fell on a Saturday in late May. She'd booked a private room at a restaurant in Orléans, a nice one, the kind that does prix-fixe and has cloth napkins and takes itself somewhat seriously. It was my grandmother's money and my grandmother's event, so I hadn't been asked to contribute to the dinner itself, which was a change. But Sebastian had mentioned 3 days before that he was a bit short and could I spot him until he got paid next week, and without thinking I'd said sure. How much? And he'd said just a couple hundred should cover it, and I had, out of pure reflex, sent him $200 before I'd even finished the thought. I noticed myself do it. That was new. Noticing in real time what I was doing. I didn't take it back, but I noticed. The dinner was warm and chaotic in the way family dinners are when there are 4 generations in one room and the wine comes out early. My grandmother sat at the head of the table and held court the way she always has, sharp and funny and requiring no assistance in commanding a room. I sat near the middle, next to my mother, and across from a cousin I only see twice a year who's gotten very into sourdough. Sebastian was at the far end. He'd ordered the most expensive thing on the prix-fixe, which was the braised short rib, and he had a glass of red in front of him that I was fairly sure wasn't included. He was doing what he always did at family events, performing, making people laugh, being the one everyone looked at. My aunt sat beside him, pleased and relaxed, and every so often she caught my eye across the table and smiled. It happened during the main course. Someone, I think it was one of my uncles, was asking me about work, and I was explaining a project I'd been managing, and the conversation turned, the way it does, to money and the cost of living and how hard it was to get ahead. And Sebastian, from the far end, loud enough that the whole table could hear, said, don't worry about Elise. She's basically running a charity over here. Isn't that right, cousin? Free room, free food, free everything. He said it laughing, the way people say things they mean while pretending they're joking. She's like a hotel with a maid service. Except the hotel doesn't charge and the maid does the groceries. The table went quiet for just a second. That particular silence where everyone processes whether what just happened was funny or not, and then a couple of people chuckled nervously. And my aunt did a small smile that was not a reprimand, and my grandmother looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. I felt the heat come up the back of my neck. I felt it very clearly. And then I felt something else. A stillness underneath the heat. Something that had been pressed down for a long time settling into place. I looked at Sebastian. He was still grinning, pleased with himself, waiting to see if I'd laugh too. Waiting to see if I'd do what I always did, which was absorb it and move on and make it easy. I didn't laugh. I picked up my water glass, took a sip, set it down. Then I leaned slightly forward so I was speaking just to him, low enough that I wasn't performing for the table. Enjoy it, I said. This is the last thing, he blinked. What? Nothing, I said, and I picked up my fork and resumed eating. He stared at me for a moment. Then he made a small sound, dismissive, and turned back to whoever he'd been talking to. I saw my aunt watching me from across the table, trying to read my expression. I gave her nothing to read. My grandmother caught my eye shortly after and raised her glass very slightly. Just to me. She's 80 years old and she has seen everything. I think she understood before anyone else did. I had sent the first email before dessert was served. The rooming house near Baseline. I'd confirmed that morning the vacancy was still available, and during a quiet moment when I'd excused myself to the restroom, I sent the inquiry from my phone to hold it. The second email went to my cell carrier, requesting the formal removal of Sebastian's line from my account effective the end of the billing cycle. The third went to my grocery delivery service to remove the shared cart access I'd given him 8 months ago when he'd asked if he could add a few things to my order. I got through the rest of the dinner. I hugged my grandmother. I said happy birthday to her twice, once in French and once in English, which she appreciated. I did not look at Sebastian more than necessary. I told him the next morning, He was in the kitchen when I came down, eating cereal. My cereal, technically, the expensive kind with no added sugar that I bought from the natural food section. And he had his phone propped against the fruit bowl, watching something. He looked up when I came in. He seemed slightly wary, in the way people are when they know something is coming, but are hoping if they act normal enough it won't arrive. I sat down across from him. I put the folder on the table. It wasn't dramatic. It was a plain manila folder with a printed summary inside. The financial breakdown I'd been building for 2 months. I'd had my paralegal friend look at it one more time the night before after the dinner, and she'd said it was clear and organized, and if it ever needed to serve as documentation in a formal context, it would hold up. I want to talk to you about some things, I said. He glanced at the folder. What's that? A record of our financial arrangement over the past 3 years, I said, or what was supposed to be an arrangement. He leaned back in his chair. Elise, I'm not asking for any of it back, I said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to collect. I'm telling you because I think you should know what it actually adds up to, and because I'm ending it. Ending what? All of it, I said. You need to find somewhere else to live. I've already found a place. There's a room available near Baseline, $650 a month. It's decent. I'll give you 30 days notice officially, but I'd appreciate being out by the end of June. Your line is coming off my phone plan at the end of this billing cycle. I've removed the shared grocery access, the pre-authorized transfer, the one you didn't know about, where I was accidentally sending you money for 7 months. That's already canceled. He stared at me. Something moved behind his eyes that I hadn't seen there before. 7 months? He said. You were sending me. By accident, yes. I didn't realize. It's corrected now. He was quiet. Then, you can't just kick me out. There are rules. You're a licensee under Ontario's Residential Tenancies Act, I said. This was something my paralegal friend had explained to me. You've paid rent 4 times in 38 months. I have the records. 30 days is more than the minimum required notice in this situation, and I'm giving it in writing. I slid a second piece of paper across the table, a simple notice I'd written out, date, terms, signed. You can take a photo of that if you want. He didn't take a photo. He sat very still. This is because of last night, he said. Last night clarified some things, I said, but I've been building to this for a while. You can't be serious, we're family. We are, I said. That's why I found you a place and I'm giving you a month's notice instead of doing this differently. He tried a few other angles. He said he was about to get a contract that would change everything, which I'd heard before. He said my aunt would be upset, which was probably true. He said I was being cold. That this wasn't like me, that he'd always thought I was someone who understood that family took care of each other. That one almost got me. Not because it was true, but because it was designed to find the exact part of me that had been agreeing with him for 3 years. I do think family takes care of each other, I said. I've been doing that. I'm done now. He left the kitchen. He spent the rest of the day in his room. I went for a walk by the canal, bought a coffee, sat on a bench in the sun, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Nothing required of me. Just the canal and the light and the particular quiet of a Sunday morning in Ottawa when the joggers haven't fully taken over yet. My aunt called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again, and I answered because I decided I would rather have the conversation than dread it. She started gently. Was I doing okay? Was something wrong? Sebastian had said I was upset, and I told her as calmly as I could what had happened and what I had done. Not all of it, not the folder or the numbers, just the shape of it. I had been supporting Sebastian financially for 3 years. It had reached a point I couldn't sustain. I had given him notice. I had found him an alternative. She went quiet. Then, you're putting your cousin out on the street. I'm giving him 30 days notice and I found him a room near Baseline. He can't afford $650 a month. He will need to, I said. He's 34. Another silence. Then she said that she had always thought I was more compassionate than this, that our grandmother would be heartbroken, that this was not how the family handled things. How does the family handle things? I asked. She didn't have an answer to that. Or she had one, but it required her to say out loud that the way the family handled things was to quietly expect certain people to absorb costs that everyone else pretended weren't there, and she wasn't willing to say that. We ended the call without resolution. I sat with the discomfort of that for a while, and then I heated up dinner and watched something on television, and went to bed at a reasonable hour and slept better than I had in months. Sebastian started looking for work in a way he hadn't before. I don't know if it was the notice or the folder or just the finality of hearing me say things plainly, but within the first 2 weeks he'd picked up 2 flagging contracts and something temporary with a moving company on weekends. He didn't apologize for the dinner comment, not exactly. He said once, passing me in the hallway, that he hadn't meant it as badly as it sounded, and I said I understood, and that was the end of it. An apology would have required him to acknowledge what he'd been doing for 3 years, and I don't think he was ready to look at that directly. Maybe he never will be. That's not my problem anymore. He moved out on the 28th of June, 2 days before the deadline. I helped him carry boxes to the car, not his car, a friend's truck, because I didn't see the point in making that part worse than it needed to be. He said thanks. I said good luck. It was awkward and slightly sad. And also, underneath all of that, a relief so enormous I felt it physically, like a pressure I'd stopped noticing, had suddenly been removed. The spare room is empty now. I've been using it as a reading room, which was what I originally intended when I bought the condo. There's a chair by the window where the afternoon light comes in well, and I have a stack of books I've been working through in the evenings. I signed up for a weekend pottery class in September, which I'd been putting off for 2 years because my weekends always seemed to belong to someone else's problems. My aunt is still cool with me. She'll thaw eventually, she always does, and I've made my peace with the fact that the thaw might take longer than I'd like. My grandmother sent me a text message 2 weeks after the dinner, which is unusual because she normally hates texting. It said, "You did right. Don't let anyone tell you different." That's the most direct she's ever been with me in 31 years, and I read it 3 times and then I saved it. I think about the version of me who would have swallowed that comment at the dinner table, who would have laughed a little too loudly, who would have made herself smaller so the discomfort would pass faster, who would have driven home afterward and felt a vague, sick feeling she didn't have words for. I was that person for a long time. I don't think I was wrong to help Sebastian when I did. Some of it was genuine, some of it was necessary. And I don't think I can draw a clean line between the generosity and the dysfunction. But I know when it tipped, and I know I let it stay tipped for longer than I should have. What I know now, and I mean this without any particular bitterness, is that being needed and being loved are not the same thing. I confused them for a long time. The people who actually love me. My grandmother with her careful text. My mother, who called the next week and said she'd been worried about me for 2 years and hadn't known how to say it. My friend who helped me with the paperwork and then took me out for dinner to celebrate afterward. Those people never once required anything financial of me. They just wanted me around. That's the difference, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit to see it clearly. The room gets afternoon light all through the summer. I had forgotten that about my own condo. I had forgotten what it felt like to just be in it, to move through it without managing around someone else. To use my kitchen at 11 on a Saturday morning without calculating what it would cost me. I make my coffee and I sit in the light and I feel the specific quiet of a life that belongs to me. And I think, there it is. That's what I was paying for all along, without knowing it. I'm not paying for it anymore.